Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning to learn more about NASA's Artemis program and humanity's return to the moon. This program is part of our larger summer reading program, which takes place every year during the months of June and July. We will provide additional information on how to learn more about all of our upcoming programs that remain for the month of July, our take-home kits, reading challenges, and prizes at the end of our time of the program today. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. And to get things rolling, a very special welcome to Patricia Moore, the communication strategist for the Artemis program. And with that, our very sincere appreciation for being here to tell us more about the exciting developments at NASA. So Patricia, if you want to take it away, we're good to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Caleb. I'm so happy to be a part of your summer reading program this morning. And I'm excited to tell you all about what's happening at NASA and what we are doing to get humans back on the surface of the moon and prepare for Mars. So with that, I'll kick it off, and we'll kick it off with a fun video to get us all excited. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my role at NASA, and then we'll jump right into the presentation and follow up at the end with Q&A.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we will discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go.
We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
And that gentleman at the end of the video is Gene Kranz. You may have heard of him before. He was the famous flight controller and flight director who helped bring our astronauts home during the Apollo 13 missions. So I'm super happy to join you this morning. Again, my name is Patricia Moore. I work at the Johnson Space Center. Right now I'm in my office at home, but when I'm at Johnson Space Center, I work with a team of individuals that's actually all over NASA at different centers, primarily at headquarters in DC. And we're a small group of individuals who are focusing on the communication and public engagement outreach for the Artemis missions. And we also have teammates all across the other centers that are working towards sharing NASA's story. And believe it or not, it's written in law for NASA that we are required to share all of our missions, our research, our findings, and our discoveries with the public. And so we have a pretty robust communication and public engagement team that work to engage audiences all across the United States to help share our story. So I primarily work with museums and science centers, the libraries, and informal education groups. But I do get the opportunity, of course, pre-COVID, to travel the United States to conferences and Comic-Cons and do workshops for educators and museums. So it's a really fun job. I'm basically a glorified storyteller for NASA. So let's just jump right in and let's talk about Artemis. So the Artemis missions are a series of missions that will return humans to the moon. And what's really exciting is that we will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon in just a few years. So the Artemis missions is for everyone. And when we go to the moon this time, we're going to stay and have a long-term permanent presence in orbit around the moon and then also on the surface of the moon. And what's really great about these missions is that we are headed to an area that we've never explored before. We are headed to the South Pole. And the South Pole region of the moon is very different than the equatorial region where we visited during the Apollo missions. And our researchers and our scientists at NASA are so excited to be able to send humans to this location. because we know that there's water ice there. And so one of the primary lunar science objectives is to understand the volatile cycles, which is the water cycle of the moon. Like, how did that water ice get to the moon? And then can we extract it and turn it into a resource that's usable for humans? So in addition to that objective, we're also looking at studying the solar system from the moon. We don't have an atmosphere distorting our telescopes and our observation units, and so we'll be able to observe Earth and our solar system from a different vantage point. And there's all sorts of lunar science. I could go on and on that our researchers are interested in. Now, the team of NASA that I support is on the human spaceflight side. So although I am super excited about these science objectives, the team that I work for are also equally as excited to test out all of our new hardware. And so when I mean hardware, it's basically all the stuff that we build and take with us on our voyages into space. And so that would include our habitats and our launch vehicles and our landers and our spacesuits and our environmental control systems and all the tools that we create and our rovers. You know, just think about all the things that you would need to survive on another world. We test those on Earth, but the ultimate test is to use them in space and see how they work. And so we are going to be able to use the Artemis missions as a way to test and prove our capabilities before we send humans to Mars. So here's a look at the South Pole region of the moon. We are super excited I know I'm excited to hear where that first landing site will be. We don't know yet, but it will be somewhere within this video. And it's a time-lapsed captured video of what the South Pole looks like over the course of a year. And if you notice, you'll see really, really dark areas, and that's typically inside of the craters. And that's where our permanently shadowed areas are. And that's where we'll find the water ice. And then you'll also notice that around the rims of the craters and edges that we're almost in constant sunlight. And that's a perfect place for a base. So we're close enough where we can send robotic explorers into the craters to extract water ice. But then we're able to set up a home base near the crater on the edges, along the edges, where we're almost in constant sunlight. And we're really going to depend on that sun for part of our powering system. So we have a saying at NASA that mission needs drive design. And the reason I always like to talk about this is because I always get the question, well, why do we need to build a new rocket and spacecraft? Why can't we use the space shuttle? Or why can't we use the Soyuz rocket that the Russians have? And why can't we use SpaceX? You know, there's so many rockets and spacecrafts out there. Why do we need to build a new one? And the reason is it's all about your mission objectives and really where your destination is. The farther away you get from Earth, the more robust and powerful your spacecraft and rocket need to be, the more safety requirements that you have, the faster your reentry speed is, the hotter the temperature your spacecraft will experience when you come home to Earth. So you can see just in this chart how challenging things get when you get away from Earth. And what's really great about our space economy is in low Earth orbit, or, you know, just about 250 miles above the Earth where the space station is, we have so many different choices in our inventory. So if NASA needs a rocket to take a payload into space, or if we need to take people into space, we have options, but we don't have that space economy around the moon yet. We want to grow it, but we don't have it yet. So NASA's going to kick it off by building our first vehicles that can get humans to the moon. And I can't wait to see what the space program does in the future. And hopefully we'll have many vehicles and many options of getting cargo and supplies, satellites, and humans to the moon one day. So the answer to that deep space challenge and the answer to getting humans into lunar orbit is the Orion spacecraft. And the Orion spacecraft is designed to ferry astronauts from the Earth to lunar orbit. The primary contractor for the Orion spacecraft is Lockheed Martin. And then, of course, they have lots of other subcontractors that are all working to help get the Orion ready. It has three main parts. You'll have the crew module where the astronauts sit and live. And it's not designed to, you know, for people to live inside for months and months. We're talking about, you know, weeks at a time. And then the power element of the Orion is called the service module, which is the back end where you see the solar panels. And that's built by the European Space Agency. So they're our first partner within our Artemis missions. And then the launch abort system is that smaller rocket right on top. And what that does is during launch, if there's something wrong with the larger rocket and we feel the crew is in danger, that launch abort system will yank the crew and their spacecraft away from the larger rocket to get them to safety. And it's very similar to the launch escape system that we used during the Apollo years. So the first Orion is already ready to go. It's sitting at Kennedy Space Center, and it's in the configuration where we have the service module and the Orion right there. And we will soon be adding it to the top of the Space Launch System rocket. So the SLS, you'll hear me say SLS a lot just because we love acronyms at NASA, but the SLS rocket will be the most powerful rocket ever built, even more powerful than the Saturn V rocket that took us to the moon. And you can see in this image here just how tall and massive it's going to be. Remember, the space shuttle is designed to go to low Earth orbit. The Dragon and the Falcon that we currently use is designed to go to low Earth orbit. Same thing for the Soyuz spacecraft and the majority of our rockets. So when we need to leave and get away from Earth's gravity, which is incredibly powerful, we need a really powerful rocket to do that. And that's what the SLS is. And as you can see, we can evolve it. So in years to come, we'll have a larger upper stage that we can add to the top to allow for even larger amounts of payload. So we'll go from about 12 elephants as far as supply space goes to 22, almost doubling our capability and storage space to send, like giant rovers and habitats and things like that into space. So the SLS for the first Artemis mission is finished. It is at Kennedy Space Center. It arrived in April of this year. And over the last month or so, we've been assembling the rocket inside of that big building that you just saw, this vehicle assembly building. And it's massive. It's a huge building by volume. It's absolutely huge. It's when you walk inside, it's just amazing. And what we do in this building is we'll stack the rocket vertically. And as we stack it and build it vertically, we're building it on top of something called the mobile launcher. And so you can see here from these two different vantage points how we've connected that orange core stage of the rocket, which has liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen tanks inside, to the two white solid rocket boosters, which are the same type of boosters we use during the space shuttle program. They're just taller to provide more thrust. So that launch, that mobile launcher I mentioned before that we're building the rocket on top of, that's what it looks like when it's not inside the building. It's this really cool, tower on top of a crawler. And the crawler is similar to a tank in that it has treads, but it has the capability of really, moving, so much weight, tons and tons and tons of weight, and a really delicate rocket on the way out to the launch pad. It crawls at about 1 mile an hour. And it takes several hours to get out there to the launch pad and get situated. And then once the mission's launched and Orion goes to the moon and comes back, it will splash down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. And so that kind of shows you the main parts of our first Artemis mission, which is Artemis I. And remember, this is all to test this equipment. We've never launched the rocket and the spacecraft together before. We've never sent Orion to the moon. And we want to test all of these systems before we put people on it in about a year to a year and a half. So let's take a look at another video. This gives you a great summary of what to expect from Artemis I, which is happening this November in 2021, and then what to expect from future missions in the years to come.
3, 2, 1, 0. Mission liftoff.
Artemis I will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust, provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis I will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
This is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it. So there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon. Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the service module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis I, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
Initially, what we'd like to do is start establishing a presence on the moon. So we're going to establish going back there on a regular basis, and then we'll end up setting up Gateway, and we would launch to the Gateway, and from Gateway, land on the surface of the moon.
We are there for, weeks, months on end. And there, we're going to be able to test out all the hardware and the habitats and the hatches and the suits and the rovers that'll allow us to prove out those technologies. The moon will lead the way to Mars, and we should be there within the next couple decades.
So it's really exciting to see everything that's to come. And as soon as we get that rocket and that Orion spacecraft tested this year, we'll be ready to assign a crew to the first crewed Artemis mission, which is going to be Artemis II. And so our crewed missions will involve 4 astronauts. That's typically how many we'll put in our Orion spacecraft. And this is a picture of astronauts testing out the Orion mock-up here at Johnson Space Center. In the little window off to the left, you can kind of see one of the engineers, poking his head, kind of to the side. But the Orion is amazing because it's a mixture of tried and true technology with analog switches, which are like, you could be kill switches for circuits and things like that. And then there's a glass cockpit too, with lots of touch screens that the astronauts can interact with. So they get a little bit of both. And you always have backup systems. So if for some reason the touch screens fail and they're not able to manipulate and do what they want to do, they always have a backup switch. And that's what you'll find in all of spacecrafts that are rated for humans, is that there are always redundant systems. So there's always a plan B, and a lot of times there's a plan C. Now, after Artemis II, we get to Artemis III, which is the moment we're all waiting for, where we'll have the first woman and the first person of color land on the surface of the moon and do a spacewalk, a moonwalk, something that hasn't been done since 1972. And we have a team of astronauts that are all working on the Artemis missions. And here's a look at our first pool, or our first group of individuals who are all supporting Artemis. Some of these astronauts will fly to the moon. Others will help in a supportive role. They'll help with training and provide their expertise. Some of them have flown to the space station numerous times, and so they're, expert astronauts, right? And some of these astronauts are brand new and have never flown in space before. So we have a really diverse group, not just in background and ethnicity, but also in talents. We have surgeons and medical doctors. We have different kinds of engineers, mechanical, electrical, aerospace, and so forth. We have scientists and researchers and geologists. And then we also have pilots that will be our commanders and who have our test pilots in the Air Force or in other parts of the military. So it's a pretty amazing group of astronauts. Now, another important piece of the Artemis missions is getting astronauts to the surface of the moon. So we have a way to get to the orbit of the moon. Now we need to get to the surface. And so NASA's been working with companies and industry since the very beginning of the space program. And the last couple of years or so, we reached out to our space industry partners and said, hey, we want to hear your ideas on what you think is the best solution and the best lander to get astronauts to the surface of the moon. And so these companies all submitted proposals, and the NASA selected the 3 companies they thought were the best, the top 3. And so these groups, Blue Origin, and then their team, which is Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper, and then you have Dynetics and SpaceX. they all had a very different solution to the challenge, right? We want to get people to the moon, and every single one of these landers looks completely different. It's really cool to see the creativity and the engineering. And so right now, NASA's in the final process of selecting one of these companies to be the first to send humans to the surface. And then we hope to continue to purchase services from these companies, or maybe even other companies in the future, to continue getting humans to the moon. All right, so Gateway, you heard about Gateway in the video, and you learned that it's an orbiting platform around the moon. And it's not a space station because it's not as big as our space station that we have around Earth. Earth's International Space Station is about the size of a football field, so it's massive. And this Gateway is tiny. There's only like 3 pieces. So you have a powering and propulsion element that's being built by Maxar. You have a very small habitat that's built by Northrop Grumman. And then you have a logistics module, which is kind of like for supplies and storage and getting materials back and forth. And that's built by SpaceX. And then in this picture, you also see a mock-up or a prototype of a lander, and then of course, Orion. So that's how it starts off. And we'll start sending pieces to Gateway probably in 2024 timeframe. We'll have to see. But we want to grow it, and we're going to do that with our international partners. So Gateway international partners include Canada, the European Space Agency, and JAXA, which is Japan. And we'll add robotics, we'll add a science laboratory, and maybe some other components with our international partners as well. So in addition to just those 3 countries that are working with us, or those 3 groups, we have countries like Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, South Korea, United Emirates, such a mouthful, sorry. And then we have Israel, I'm trying to think who I'm forgetting, and a few others that are all part of what we call our Artemis Accords, which is how NASA will work with other countries' space agencies to return to the moon. And so we have a lot of partners right now, not just with companies and industry, but also with other countries. All right, now once we're on the surface of the moon, there's so much to do. That first mission with humans on the surface will be about 6 days, so they'll be there almost a week. And then each mission after that will continue to grow and have longer missions. We'll go from days to weeks to months, and then eventually a year. And as we test out and build our habitats and we send rovers to the surface, we learn how to extract water, ice, and turn it into a resource that we can use. And we're basically learning to live on another world. And everything we learn from these Artemis missions will help us plan and prepare for Mars. And so we're not ready to go right now. I mean, it's going to be at least 20 years before we send our first humans to Mars. But in the meantime, we'll continue to send robotic explorers and to help us understand what the environment is like. And we've been doing that for a while. You can see Sojourner, which was in the 90s. Then you have the twin rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. You have Curiosity, that was in 2014. And then now you have Perseverance on the surface. And so all of these robots are paving the way for our human missions. And maybe some of you that are watching are the perfect age where you can both be a part of the Artemis generation and the Mars generation. We are going to need all kinds of talented engineers and scientists. We're going to need business people and space lawyers and communicators and all sorts of different talents to make these missions possible. And who knows, maybe one of you will be the person that stands on Mars and gets to look back at Earth 39 million miles away. It's pretty crazy to think, you know, how challenging these missions are. And that's really what Artemis is all about. It's about helping us prepare and learn so that we can send humans farther into the solar system. So for those of you who are interested in being a part of NASA, I always recommend to our students come in as a NASA intern in college. We have so many internship opportunities available at all of our NASA centers. You could also be an intern at a space company too. It doesn't have to be with NASA and with the government. I mean, this gives you experience working in all different departments and areas of NASA. You can check out our welding and our crafting folks who are building the spacecraft with their hands. They use the most, up-to-date, amazing welding technology that's out there. We have folks that are primarily computer software engineers, folks that are building the guts and the brains of the spacecrafts and rockets, food scientists. We have folks that design space food that tastes yummy but has a long shelf life and can last, months and eventually years in storage before being eaten. We have our flight controllers, which are mission control that help run the missions and manage the missions and provide support and help problem solve when things don't go right. We have many kinds of engineers. 2 engineers in particular I want to mention are robotic engineers that are building the robots that go to into the solar system. We've got spacesuit engineers here at Johnson Space Center that are building our next generation of spacesuits that will go to the moon and Mars. And then I'll have a whole team of scientists and researchers. Some are geologists, some are planetary scientists, heliophysics, earth science, climate change. We have all of these different types of researchers that are trying to benefit and help us on Earth, and then also help plan for future missions. And then if I could have any job other than what I have right now, I would want to be an astronaut trainer. I have some friends that are astronaut trainers, and they get to spend their day with the astronauts and teach them how to stay healthy in space, how to exercise, how to use the space toilet, how to fix things when they break. How do you get rid of your trash? How do you take care of, just your body in general? How do you, let's see, what are some other of the fun things that they do? How do you do spacewalks, being a diver and training astronauts underwater? How do you prepare for a fire? Anything you can imagine, there's going to be someone that's training the astronauts in that area. And then you have your non-traditional NASA roles, which include people that may not have STEM degrees. So you have graphic designers and artists that are help to tell the story. You have people that are managing our social media and our website accounts, that are working with the media to help answer questions and help inform the public. And then you have space lawyers, you have business people in finance, and teachers. We have the education department at NASA. So really, exploration is a team sport. It takes all kinds of people from all over the United States and really all over the world to make space flight and space travel possible. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I would love to answer your questions about NASA, about space, about the Artemis missions. So feel free to put them in the chat, or Caleb can help and you guys can unmute and ask.
Thank you, Patricia. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Fantastic presentation. As she said, if any of y'all have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the message box in the chat there. I'll give it a second. I've got some questions myself, but we'll give folks a second to see if we have any that get sent in.
Don't be shy. You can ask me anything you've ever wanted to know.
We've got one.
All right, let's hear it.
The question is, because you work with so many different nations, is there ever a language barrier, and how do you overcome it?
That is an amazing question. And yes, there are language barriers at times. Our astronauts, we work heavily with, I would say the main countries we work the most with are Russia. All of our astronauts and people who work closely with the Russians are required to take Russian language training. Some of the astronauts say that's the hardest part of their training, is learning to speak Russian. So when the astronauts go to space and live on the space station, if there's a Japanese astronaut on board, they encourage the astronauts to take Japanese language lessons as well. And then our European partners have lots of languages. They could be French, they could be German, they could be Italian, so there's a variety. So the astronauts and the team aren't expected to be fluent, but they really try, especially with Russia, because they're one of our strongest partners on our International Space Station efforts. But the Russians and all of the other countries are also required to, to take English language questions. And so there are times where interpreters are needed, but the people who work closely with other international groups really try to understand the culture and understand the language so they can better communicate. Great question.
And it looks like we have another one coming through here. How do the continuous ups and downs of political alliances, atmospheres, influence the relationship between astronauts?
Yeah.
And there's a comment says,
yeah, imagine you have
to at least be amicable.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question too. And I can only tell you what I see and what I know of my astronaut friends. When astronauts train, there's always an international crew, and there's always at least one American and Russian, and then you usually have a Japanese, Canadian, or European team member in that group of 3. And they really try to put politics aside. I mean, if, you know, even in America, we don't agree, right? We have political differences. These individuals train for years together. Their families have dinner together. They are truly a family and they are friends. And what's great about space, and especially science, is a lot of those political issues may happen and are dealt with at the really, really high government level, but down below where the people are working together, it's not in your face and it's not as stressful. So of course it's always underlying in there, you know, things can be tense with some of our, you know, allies, and we may be really great at collaborating in science, but maybe in other areas we're not, you know, but I can tell you for certain that, that there's not a lot of bickering, and there's not, you know, anger towards one another. They really do work hard together and train for years and become friends. And they try to let their bosses and the people way up in the government handle the more tedious political issues. You're very welcome. It's a great question.
Thank you. I have one. It's probably not as deep as.
That's all right. This don't have to be deep
questions.
Questions. It doesn't have to. My favorite questions are some of the silly ones that I get asked from kids. So ask away.
So we saw a little bit about the transport of the rocket and the mobile launch pad out to the launch site from the assembly building. Can you talk a little bit about how some of the equipment or the rocket or other vehicles are transported from where they're manufactured to where they're actually put together there at the launch site?
Yeah, that's a really great question too. So I'm trying to find the video that I wanted to show you too. I have so many things opened. Let's see. So it's really interesting that all the pieces of the rocket and spacecraft are made all over the world, all over the United States and in Europe, and they all have to be brought to Kennedy Space Center. That's the final destination. So, so the rockets that, the white rockets that you saw, those are built and tested in Utah, and they are put on a train and they are driven all the way down to Florida on a train. And that's how we did it during the shuttle days, and that's how we do it right now. The engines are manufactured and then assembled and built at Stennis Space Center, because that's where they're tested on the test stand. And then they then attach those engines to the core stage, which I'll show you guys so you know what I'm talking about. The core stage, which is right here. And then that gets to the Kennedy Space Center on a barge. And so they put it on on a bayou kind of stream that's near the Stennis Space Center, put it on the Mississippi, go down to the Gulf, and then they, you know, drive it, you know, boat it all the way down to Kennedy Space Center. And then once it's there, they have a series of cranes, as you can see, that pick it up, and then they will assemble, you know, one piece at a time. And this is really sped up, but it moves really slow. You can see here just how slow it moves, and then they speed up the video to kind of give you an idea. And I'm gonna skip a little bit so you can see when they start connecting it to the boosters. It's pretty cool because it's pretty long. So like here they go. They lift it up and then they lower it down into the hole that they've created for the core stage. And there's only about a foot between the boosters and the core stage. So they can't hit and knock the rockets, right? You can't have an accidental, oops, I bumped it, you know, so it's slowly lowered down. The Orion spacecraft pieces, sometimes they are shipped in an aircraft called the Guppy. And I wish I had a picture of that, but you can Google it later. It's a plane, not a spaceship, sorry. It's a plane that looks like a big giant guppy whalefish. And it's made to hold very unusual shaped objects, mostly for aircraft and for space. And so they've will do that back and forth from Plumbrook, which is in Ohio, where we do acoustics testing and vibration testing on all of our spacecrafts. And so we have to get these pieces of hardware to and from. And so we have trains, we have cargo, you know, trucks, and then we have aircraft that move everything around. Pretty cool. Great question.
That's amazing, just watching
yeah
monumental pieces of.
I know, they're so big.
Moving around.
Over 300 feet each.
Golly.
Anybody else have a question?
I have one or two more, but I'm going to wait and see if we have any others from. We'll go ahead and ask one here. And folks, if you still have any more questions, be sure to type them in the chat there. Will there be, once the Gateway Station is established, are there plans to eventually have kind of a permanent presence on there, sort of like there is with the space station at this point, with crews just rotating out? Or will it be just like for certain missions, there will be crew on board, and then at other times it'll just be kind of automated?
Yeah, so that's the plan right now. The last piece that you said is to have crew on board some of the time, and then the rest of the time it's automated and controlled from Earth. It could eventually get to the point where we have a permanent, crew in orbit around Gateway. We do want to have a permanent crew on the surface eventually. So there might be times that they go to and from this, the surface to Gateway for different things. So we'll just really have to kind of see what happens, in the next, 15 to 20 years. But it is designed, Gateway is designed to be uncrewed so that we don't have astronauts on board all the time. And it's going to be able to, manage itself, and we'll be able to run it from Earth. And then we'll have crew come at least at first once a year. Our missions will happen once a year, and then we hope to be able to pick up the pace a little bit from there. But once we're on the moon and we're there for, months at a time, it's those missions, they'll, the next crew would be coming in, maybe 6 months later, or maybe, and that sort of thing. Kind of like we do on the space station. You may have this reoccurring, supply missions and people coming to and from, but the goal is really to have people on the surface of the moon permanently. And then we'll have to see what happens with Gateway. There's another question from Lindsay. All right, she says, obviously these pieces are immense and expensive and delicate. Yes, I'll guess to all of those. Are there any precautions you take when shipping them? Yes, we're always very nervous when we have to ship anything, because there's always a chance that something can go wrong. And then after you've tested and validated it, you don't want to have to retest and validate it again. And so they ship it and they strap it in, the best that they know how. We've been shipping rocket pieces for a long time now. So some of the newer things that we haven't done recently was, we build a spacecraft and we, send it around the US for different testing. We haven't done something like that with Orion in a really long time. But there have been kind of horror stories before where things get stuck or the truck breaks down and there's an important, expensive piece of equipment on it, and that stresses everyone out. But usually they have some sort of caravan, with police and some other things, just like you see when you're traveling. You've got big pieces of equipment, you have a caravan of law enforcement, but we're very careful. And we don't announce when we're moving things, because we don't want, any ill actions towards any of the government property either. So when we moved that really large tank from Stennis Space Center to Florida, and we floated it on the barge, people knew that it was going to be going to Kennedy Space Center soon, but we didn't announce to the public when we were leaving, and we only announced when it arrived. So we do have some safety procedures in place to help with things like that. You're welcome. Great question.
Very good. And then the last one on my end. We've occasionally seen what life is like aboard the space station. For those of us who kind of try to keep up every once in a while with how things are going up there. Do you have any ideas that we've never had a permanent presence on the moon before, on the lunar surface? Can you talk a little bit about what life is expected to be like for those crew members that are up there, and the different, you kind of touched a little bit on the different things that they have to be trained on. So I imagine it's going to be a whole different way of living up there than you could expect on the Earth's surface.
That is so true. And I can compare it a little bit about to what is on space station to give people a reference. And so when astronauts are selected and they are assigned a mission, they spend a couple of years training for that mission. And then once they're there, so let's say whether they're on the space station or they go to the moon, every single moment of their day is scheduled. every single moment of the astronauts' day on Earth is scheduled. They are constantly in meetings, they're in trainings, they're being physically fit, they're doing health assessments, and then they even schedule in breaks for them too. So it's not like they work them to death, but they have a very, very rigid schedule. And in space, that day, they get their list of things that they're supposed to do. And so a lot of what they do, believe it or not, is just maintaining their environment and fixing things that break and checking on systems and cleaning. Did you know they do cleaning on the weekends? Well, they got to get rid of all that dust, right? And they wipe down surfaces so that you don't have bacterial growth. And so the life on the moon will be similar, where they will spend a big chunk of their time just maintaining their environment and keeping their house updated, and clean. And then the rest of their time, it will be research, or technology, what we call technology demonstrations. And so if they're not doing science, then they're testing out a new piece of equipment to see how it works and how it reacts. They're going out and doing moonwalks, and bringing in samples and talking back and forth with researchers and people in mission control. And so every part of their day is scheduled. And then NASA does leave them alone at dinner time. So once the day is over and it's time for dinner, the astronauts will all gather together, have dinner together, because they don't typically eat in the morning or at lunch together because they're busy. They just kind of grab food on the go. But they all sit down together at dinner or float together at dinner and chill. And then they have the evening to do whatever they want. And then NASA wakes them up and they start all over again. So I imagine some of the things they would be doing, is going out and doing spacewalks, going and investigating a certain area of interest to scientists, hopping in the rover and going for a drive, bringing back samples, setting up a laboratory, or doing science in glove boxes, fixing things that break, so it'll be a lot like being here on Earth, but just being in an environment where you have to wear a spacesuit and you always have to worry about not having air.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question that's coming in chat, so I'll mute here and take it away.
Okay, so Lindsay's asking, how does or will healthcare work when you're several million miles and an atmosphere away from the nearest hospital? Ooh, and this is a huge challenge for NASA, and that is why we have astronauts that are medical doctors. And so it is not likely that every mission that we have will include a medical doctor, but all of the astronauts are trained on basic first aid and how to handle emergency situations. So if astronauts get a cut in space, the body and the blood is different, in space. So how do you handle that? If you have like a massive cut, like something that would be like an artery or whatever, on the space station, anything that's really scary, they could hop into the spacecraft and be home in a matter of hours. Same thing as like being sick. Moon's going to be a little different because you're 3 to 4 days away, so they're going to have portable equipment. So just like we have portable defibrillators and ultrasound machines and things like that, a lot of that technology came from the space program because there was a need to have portable devices in space. And so NASA developed the initial technology, and then there were spin-offs and then applications in other areas of our lives. And so they'll have a lot of portable devices. All the astronauts will have to be trained on how to handle. They even train on how do you do CPR in a weightless environment? How do you support yourself and be able to provide the necessary, compressions? And so all of those things are determined and figured out here on the ground. And then our flight surgeons, our medical team that's on the ground, will look at how best to train the astronauts so that they know what to do in those kinds of emergencies. But there's not a hospital, right? So that's why we don't put people in space who have pre-existing conditions. We don't put people in space who have health problems. They cannot be sick when they launch. And so these astronauts are probably the healthiest, the most physically fit people on the planet. Because we just can't take that risk of something that might happen that we know is wrong with them. Like, if you have heart conditions or diabetes and those types of things come with additional complications. We just won't fly astronauts that have those conditions. And so that way we can minimize the amount of things that could go wrong. Great question.
All right, we're coming up towards the end of our time again. There's a thank you message.
Oh, you're very welcome, Lindsay. You have wonderful questions. Thanks for joining us this morning.
So we'll give another few seconds if you have any last minute questions to throw in there.
while you're thinking on your questions, I want to encourage you guys, if you're interested in what's going on with NASA, really the easiest way to follow us is on social media. Everybody's got a social media account. So whether you're a Facebook person or a Twitter or an Instagram or a Tumblr, or what else do we have? I think we even have Snapchat. NASA's got a handle almost on everything but TikTok, I think now. We even have a Pinterest. And for all the ladies out there who love Pinterest, I know I love Pinterest and my daughter has a Pinterest, you know, so there's so many different ways to stay connected with NASA, and you can kind of choose which topic areas are of interest, because we have like the main NASA account, but then we also have an Artemis account. We also have a Mars Robotic Explorer, you know, social media account. So if you want to zero in on areas that you're most interested in, that's a great way to stay connected.
Alrighty, well, I think that brings us to the end of our program here today. Thank you all for joining us, and especially thank you, Patricia, for coming in and presenting us. It's been absolutely fabulous. A lot of great information and insight into the Artemis program, and wish you all the best for the upcoming years, and especially for this November. We'll have our
crossing our fingers.
Launch.
Everything goes well, and we launch in mid-November. So stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. All right.